Right. Hello. We have been a little tardy about discussing chapter 3 of Gender Trouble, Subversive Bodily Acts, but here I am. So we can start the discussion on the third chapter of Gender Trouble, which is called Subversive Bodily Acts. And in this particular chapter, Judith Butler begins by discussing Julia Kristeva. And she talks specifically about Julia Kristeva's theorizing of the semiotic. Yes, and those of us who are unfamiliar with the idea of the semiotic, Julia Kristeva broadly is saying that the semiotic, she talks about semiotic as the feminist alternative to the Lacanian symbolic, which she, with some justification, regards as being patriarchal. So she says that if the symbolic, that is to say language that we usually use, if that is patriarchal, then we need to have an alternative language, and she proposes semiotic as the alternative language. Now, what does she say about semiotic? She says that the semiotic can be taken as an alternative to the symbolic because semiotic is a dimension of language occasioned by the maternal body. And if it is occasioned by the maternal body, then it is subversive of the symbolic. She says that poetic language is an example of the semiotic, but her semiotic is always subordinate to the symbolic. And if symbolic therefore always asserts its hegemony, how can there be any kind of subversion? Because you're always going to be dominated by the symbolic. That is to say, you're always going to be dominated by the language that we conventionally use. There are two criticisms that Butler makes. One criticism is this relationship to the maternal body a knowable experience? Can we identify it? Is there a way of knowing this relationship to the maternal body? First point. And second point is that she says that semiotic leads to the breakdown of culture and it can never be consistently maintained. So if it cannot be consistently maintained and if it causes a breakdown in culture, well, of course, presuming that culture is regarded as being patriarchal, which is all very well, but then if it cannot be sustained, then what is the point of it? So that is broadly what is being said. Also, and this is where Judith Butler again sort of takes on her post-structuralist standpoint, and she says, yes, but Julia Kristeva seems to be thinking about the maternal body as being pre-discursive, as if maternal body is something that lies before language. Yes, it is pre-cultural, but is it not in fact the case that the maternal body is also an effect of culture rather than its cause? Because surely one of the most important components of the culture that we experience is the body of the mother, which is something that patriarchy absolutely loves. Patriarchy loves the body of the mother, which is why patriarchy is constantly in the habit of reminding women that they are not quite women until they bear children. So women who don't bear children are sort of not quite women in the eyes of patriarchy. So clearly motherhood is something that patriarchy absolutely adores. So how can therefore motherhood be claimed as a site of subversion which has been completely colonized by patriarchy since time immemorial? Well, actually, since patriarchy began, motherhood has been sort of celebrated because motherhood is of tremendous benefit. It is of great use to patriarchy. And also, Julia Kristeva says certain other things as well. So she talks about the subject of the poetic language And she talks about her motherhood. She talks about how motherhood, as entering into the contact with the mother. So for her, female homosexuality is the emergence of psychosis into culture, and so homosexuality therefore cannot be culturally sustained, because she herself has said that that the semiotic cannot be culturally sustained. Also. And this is where she becomes even more disturbing, because Judith Butler points out that Julia Kristeva says that the semiotic exists, and this is where she actually quotes from Julia Kristeva. Semiotic exists in the whirling dust of Kabbalic, Arab, and Indian mystics. So therefore, if she's saying that, if she's saying that semiotic exists only, or it can be found in the whirling dust of Kabbalic, Arab, and Indian mystics, then that also can be regarded as an example of what we understand as, you guessed it, Orientalism. So that is Orientalism. So how can that be a good thing? And so Julia Kristeva is finally the final engagement with Julia Kristeva that happens in this section is when Judith Butler says is that please don't celebrate the maternal body in this sort of uncomplicated way, because according to Judith Butler, the maternal body is always already symbolic. So the maternal body already exists in the symbolic sphere, and let's not celebrate that too much. Yeah. So we then, and this is where she then moves on to being critical of Foucault's understanding of Herculean Barbin. Now this is a fairly large section. This is the section 2 and 3 of the third chapter, where she is very critical of Foucault, and she says that Foucault talks about the happy dispersal of pleasures in Herculean Barbin's body. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but basically she seems to say that if Herculean Barbin's sort of identity was such a wonderful, happy dispersal of pleasures, why does Herculean Barbin then commit suicide? So perhaps the case is not as wonderfully happy as Foucault would want us to believe. So does Herculean, but this is Judith Butler's question, does Herculean's heterogeneity mark him as feminine? S/he, she, he is consistently falling into the opposition of positive and negative narcissism, lauding and berating himself or herself. So the love prohibited by death or abandonment or both is a love that takes prohibition to be its condition and aim. Herculean is an example of an outside the law which is maintained inside the law. So Herculean Barbin's rebellion is doomed to defeat because it reiterates the law. And this is a point that Michel Foucault also to a certain extent agrees with, in the sense that when you are talking about LGBT rights, for example, maybe one should be a little bit cautious about celebrating LGBT rights, because if the law grants those rights to LGBT people, then the LGBT people who are uncomplicatedly accepting those rights are falling into the trap of being categorized. And in falling into the trap of being categorized, in falling into the trap of being marked, they are actually supporting state power the way in which they perhaps are not quite aware of. So there is that sort of contradiction that remains. I'm going to actually end this particular video by talking about something that many of us who believes that, sex is biological, we constantly find ourselves drawn towards the very attractive prospect of the chromosome. So therefore XX female, XY male, and of course Judith Butler over here quotes several people, but I'm just going to point out two people that she quotes. One is Dr. David Page, and the other is Anne Fausto Sterling. So, so those of you who are interested in debunking the whole sort of almost holy, sort of celebration of the chromosomal sex, maybe you should look at the work of Dr. David Page and Anne Fausto Sterling, because both of them are disputing the idea that XX chromosome makes female and XY chromosome makes male, because Dr. David Page found some males with XX chromosome and he has certainly found some females with XY chromosome. So therefore that kind of uncomplicated mapping of sex on the basis of chromosome is perhaps not entirely a good idea. And also, there is also the work of Anne Fausto Sterling, who points out that XX males lack sperm-producing germ cells and XY females lack egg-producing cells. So if an XX female is incapable of producing eggs, and if an XY male is incapable of producing sperm, then what kind of a male and what kind of a female are we looking at? Because surely the whole point of classifying bodies as male and female is that they should ultimately be able to reproduce. It is reproduction that is driving the marking of sex. So if some male bodies are incapable of reproducing, if some female bodies are incapable of reproducing, here comes the big question: are they male, are they female at all? But you see, they look female to you, they look male to you, they do. The male bodies have a penis, the female bodies have a vagina. So based on that, they're being classified as male and female, but for absolutely anatomical reasons, they're unable to take part in the whole reproductive process that patriarchy wants of them. So do they still get to be male and female? If that is the case, then are we actually disregarding the whole chromosomal narrative, and are we therefore basing our sexing of bodies purely on genitalia? So that is broadly the question that Judith Butler raises. So she finishes this particular section in the third chapter, called Unscientific Postscript, by asking the question as to why is the presence or absence of testes so important? Why not the presence or absence of ovaries? Because it is the presence or absence of testes that apparently decides on the gender or sex of the baby. Why is the binary assumed, which is an absolute moot question? And shouldn't the question be why a binary rather than how the binary? So why is the binary necessary at all? Of course, we know the answer to that, but that is what Judith Butler says. I'm going to stop here for now. In the next summary, we shall move on to the third section of this particular chapter. Thank you.